So we're going to start this lesson by talking about constituencies. And they're defined as a body of voters in a given area who elect a representative or senator. So for a senator, their constituency would be the entire state that they represent. Whereas for the House of Representatives, they are going to represent districts within a state. So we'll talk a little bit more about districts here in just a minute. The process of this division is often political and controversial, especially in the House of Representatives. So let's first talk about apportionment, and that is going to determine how those 435 representatives within the House of Representatives are going to be divided among the states. So since 1929, the House of Representatives has had 435 members. And the size of a state's representation is going to depend on a state's population. So states with larger populations, like the state of California, are going to have more representatives in the House of Representatives, whereas states with smaller populations, so like Vermont, which is a small state, or Montana, which has a lot of wide open land, they're going to have less representatives. And every state is going to get at least one representative. So they're able to determine apportionment, so how many representatives each state gets, based on census data. So a census is conducted every 10 years to determine state population and other demographics. And that is how they are going to determine how many representatives each state gets. So this is an example from the 2010 census. So you can see some states with larger populations, like Texas, are going to have a whole lot more representatives than some of these smaller states, like Rhode Island, that only has 2. The state of Kentucky has 6, okay? And you can see that after each census, the map might change a little bit. So for example, some states lost representatives and some states gained representatives, okay, after that apportionment. So after the census data was looked at, okay, so it can change every 10 years. Now, states will be further divided into congressional districts. So let's talk a little bit about districts. So redistricting. So after the census is conducted every 10 years, states will redraw the boundaries of the electoral districts. So each state legislature divides the state into congressional districts, which is a number of geographical areas with roughly equal populations corresponding to the number of House seats held by the state. So for example, in the state of Kentucky, Louisville is essentially its own district, whereas much of eastern Kentucky is its own district, okay? And that's so that they are equal in population. So think of Louisville compared to the population in eastern Kentucky. State legislatures have broad discretion on how district boundaries are constructed. Districts must be roughly equal in population and drawn based on racial considerations that are subject to strict scrutiny, okay? So they have to be careful when they're drawing these district boundaries. Now, because state legislatures draw the district maps, the stakes can be really high. So a party holding a majority in a given state legislature might try to draw the map to its advantage. So this is when a party holding a majority is going to try to manipulate district boundaries to elect to Congress a disproportionate number of members of that party, okay? So wanting that party to have the most seats in Congress. And this is called gerrymandering. And we'll talk a little bit more about gerrymandering in the next slide. But this here is an example of redistricting. So you can look at the boundaries here for each district. They're numbered. And then after the census and redistricting, you can look at the new boundaries and how it is changed. Okay? So good example of redistricting here. So let's talk a little bit more about gerrymandering. And there is a video linked here if you want to click on it and watch a little bit more, because I think that this can be a difficult concept to understand. So, gerrymandering is defined as the intentional use of redistricting to benefit a specific interest or group of voters. And it can be broken down as packing and cracking. So packing is this process of creating districts that include a large proportion of opposition voters, limiting their voting power by concentrating them in a small number of districts. Cracking, on the other hand, is the process of spreading opposition voters among many districts and preventing them from having a majority in any of them. Okay, so for example, this is a little bit of both because you can see how this would be packing. So you're packing all of those opposition voters into a couple of districts. And then cracking would be making them the smaller proportion of a district, okay? So in this case, red is going to win that election because they're going to hold more districts, okay? So this is a good example of packing and cracking here. So partisan gerrymandering is going to aim to increase the representation of one political party at the expense of another, okay? So if you are a Republican Party, you're going to try to manipulate it so that your party has control. Racial and ethnic gerrymandering aims to increase the likelihood of electing members of minorities as representatives. And this is going to result in what is called majority-minority districts, where a minority is the majority of that district. And that is where we're going to stop with this video.